very much, Romel, and thank you very much to the distinguished leaders of these two universities. And most of all, I'm very, very grateful to you, our audience, who have come out this evening, and to my colleagues with whom I'm sharing this distinguished platform. I am, in fact, each of us is a preacher in our own right. And so we are usually have the full run of the platform for ourselves. And so to have to split it among three means we've got to make a triplet, what is usually a single berth. And therefore, I'll have to get started quickly so that I can shut up and not let my Baptist background overrun me and take away the time. I want to, and since we'll have plenty of time to raise questions with you, let me try to get into my general comments. I think that we need to be very clear about the nature of the national and cultural context in which we find ourselves. I don't believe that it is accidental that the topic of this discussion is the spiritual crisis in America. We could very well say the spiritual crisis in the Western world. Spokane is simply a particular instance of a general problem which exists throughout this nation, which we have the responsibility on an individual level to attend to. The problems that we have in terms of interpersonal relationships, cultural conflict, are a byproduct of some bigger issues which I believe are very clearly captured in the spiritual crisis that America is facing. That spiritual crisis is the fact that we have, in many ways, betrayed some very fundamental assumptions about what we are as a nation. A fundamental assumption in any spiritual system, whether it is a Judeo-Christian Islamic background, whether it's an Eastern background, every spiritual system begins with the fundamental assumption that human beings must be respectful of each other. If there is a betrayal of the fundamental responsibility to care, share, and love among people, then the possibility of making any contact with a divine sphere or a higher level of being cannot occur unless we are effective in terms of contacting each other in the mutually human sphere. I would like to suggest to you that within this culture led by America, we have two major issues that have reached epidemic proportions over the last decade, certainly. One is an accelerated form of dehumanization. The human being generally does not have the respect, the priority, the significance, and the divinity that was laid down by the founding fathers of this nation, and certainly as decreed by the founders of the religious and the faith systems of which we are a part. The consumerism in America has made us much more content to somehow much more intent to watch our reality portrayed on the media, or to somehow buy various symbolic representations that are token representations of what it means to have real relationships, We are much more involved in Search for Tomorrow, The Edge of Night, or Survival, or listen to Dr. Phil talk about what Oprah didn't say and what Oprah said that Dr. Phil ought to say, and what Larry King is discussing. And the whole process of human interaction is something that we now observe other people doing while diminishing in our capacity to do it ourselves. So this involvement in a media-wrecked society has destroyed our capacity to interact. In fact, more people have individual iPods, individual CDs, individual televisions, individual DVDs, and often within the same household, everyone is engaged in an individual experience, watching the human experience portrayed in some type of dramatic media form. This is not only the characteristic in terms of the vast majority of homes in this nation, but it is served to feed into the process of dehumanizing us as a community. Because we learn to be human by interacting with significant human beings in our environments. We learn to be human by interacting with family. Families don't eat together at the same tables anymore. They sit together eating their TV dinners that have been prepared in their microwaves while listening to their iPods, while talking on their individual cell phones, sitting at the same table all together. You sit next to people on planes, you sit next to people in restaurants, you pass each other on campus, and people are often walking along together, sitting in the same SUV, each one talking individually on his individual cell phone to someone else who's talking to someone else while sitting in a gathering who's talking on their phones together, and no one is interacting with each other. I fly very often, as we often do, and one of the amazing things is how infrequently people speak to each other even on the planes. But everybody on the plane has a cell phone talking to somebody someplace else who's talking to them on a phone, and they're not interacting with whoever they're interacting with whomever they're talking, because they're talking to them on their cell, and they're sitting next to you, and you never even say good evening to the person next to you because they're busily engaged in their cell phones until the stewardess, of course, tells you to cut it off because the door is about to be closed in the plane, and therefore you can't talk on your cell phone, and then you go to sleep, or you put on your iPod and put on your earphones so you can go into your individual world whereby you don't have to interact with anyone except the mass media that's there. This dehumanization has made us frayed and frail. We are actually ill-equipped to interact with other people. We don't know how to interact with other people. And in the process of doing so, we have somehow lost our capacities to be fundamentally human. We have in a culture where, in fact, where humanity and humanism used to be determined by what was right, we live in a culture where might has been equated with right. And rather than being concerned about the people of the world, we are concerned about who might kill us before we kill them, if we don't kill them before they kill us, with the weapons of mass destruction that they are going to destroy us with before we destroy them with the weapons of mass destruction that we have, because we are always absolutely terrified of the fact that we are living in this era and reality where our concern and interaction with other people is not with how to connect with the loving, caring, sharing, spiritual part of other people, but how can our might make sure that we are right and to impose our right by virtue of our might, and to ensure that no one can outmight our might so that they won't be any more right than our might will let them be right. This reality has led to a reality of further dehumanizing us as a culture, and in this dehumanization, we then are very, very ill-equipped, socially ill-equipped, to somehow interact with each other. So one aspect of the spiritual crisis is this dehumanization. The second part is what I call a growing xenophobia. Xenophobia is one of those concepts from our specialty as psychologists, whereby people are afraid of anyone who isn't like them. There is this terror of being terrorized by foreigners. And so people then move into their niches of similarity. They move into their little cubs of protective similarity, because as a culture, we've become incredibly xenophobic. We are afraid of anything that is unfamiliar to us. And the unfamiliarity of almost anybody but us, but our reality, as our reality has been dictated, has led us then to be extremely desensitized to the commonality of our humanity. So human is defined by what me and my cell conversation partner happens to be talking about. Our commonality is defined by which program do we watch on a regular basis. We can only discuss our mutual involvement with Desperate Housewives on Wisteria Lane. We are somehow concerned as to whether or not we are more concerned and more involved in the media-created realities of what human interactions are really all about. And in doing so, this xenophobia has desensitized us to human trauma. About a year or so ago, as Katrina moved through New Orleans, as long as the media would give us a glimpse of that human suffering, that we were all amazed that there was such poverty in America, there was such hopelessness in America, that was not created by a storm, but a storm that somehow brought it to front page coverage, that created in the awareness of the entire nation for just a fleeting moment that want still exist in America. The image that everyone kept referring to is that, my God, the Superdome looks just like a third world country. The third world country looks just like America looks every day. But our desensitization of seeing the world only in the mirrors that have been created for us has made us completely insensitive and desensitized to the suffering of everyone around us. So as long as you can get your Whopper, and you can get your Burger King, and get your Taco Bell, and get your meal, and enjoy your iPod, and go to your party, and have your bottle of beer, and do your good thing, everything is all right. And this commercial world of unreality has made us believe that somehow your individual comfort is a mirror of the planet. And then for a fleeting moment when we couldn't escape the devastation of these tens of thousands of people who live in a situation that they were in before Katrina came, that suddenly got put before our very eyes, we then began to understand for just a fleeting moment before they switched the channel and changed the emphasis and gave us something else to worry about, that we were able to understand what goes on every day. But that is reflective of a culture that has become totally desensitized to human trauma. So you say, well, what are they complaining about? Why are the immigrants all getting together in D.C. saying that we need to do something about these terrible laws that they are trying to impose? Why are they having this million-man march, this million more movement, the million family movement? Why are these people raising all these problems? They seem to be all right to me. I watched them on the Huxtables. All the Negroes are doing fine. I see all the night Hispanics, everyone I know is just doing wonderfully these days, and I don't understand what the concern is. These are things from yesterday, and that's because of a reality that is no longer based upon the nature of the reality that we live in. The media has taken away our senses and has created for us artificial senses, and we no longer see what's going on. We see the statistics of the deaths of people dying daily in Iraq, and it has become no more than a statistic on the 6 o'clock news, a 20-minute report. And we don't even understand the number of children, the number of women, the number of babies, the number of fathers, the number of mothers whose lives will never be the same, who've been devastated by war. It becomes a matter of who has or does not have weapons of mass destruction. It becomes a political issue. It becomes whether or not the gas is going to go to $3 an hour. It becomes an issue of how will I be inconvenienced. As long as they don't bring the draft back and try to sit me there, everything is all right. Fight your war if you want to. It's not a concern for me. The reality is that desensitization has made us as a community of people unable to attend not only to the suffering of other people unlike ourselves, we don't even see the suffering of people just like ourselves. So we then are required to somehow make a radical overhaul of the way that we exist in this world, or this situation will simply intensify and become worse. I want to suggest several things. If we want to resolve a spiritual crisis, we must do what other generations have done, and that is to take back our human sensitivity. Each of us must become an activist within themselves. Each of us must understand that the reality that's created by CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, CNN is a reality that has been tailor-made and structured for our consumption. That somehow the cable reality is not the reality. If you do not, as a student, as a faith believer, as a human being, will not seek out information so that you can avail yourselves of the information about the nature of what's really going on in the world, if you don't turn off your cell phone long enough to talk to the person sitting next to you, if you don't take those iPod things out of your ears long enough to listen to someone who may be crying right next to you, perhaps you may need to learn to have conversations again with people face to face. I find that most people don't know how to converse to each other face to face anymore, but they talk for hours on the cell phone, running their minutes up on Singular and Verizon and Sprint and Nextel every month. So they have excessive numbers of minutes used, but you sit down face to face and they can't even talk to each other. We then need to take our lives back. We need to take our lives back from the electrocution of our lives, where the technology has literally electrocuted our basic human interactions. As students, as believers, as men and women, we must require our humanity to be reestablished. We can't begin to somehow attend to the disrespect of groups, whether they be women, whether they be Hispanics, whether they be blacks, whether they be Jews, whether they be young people, whether they be old people, whatever your particular group of oppression may be, we can't attend to other people's groups because we then have become so preoccupied with the televised reality of an electronically created reality. So we must each take initiative to do something to make a difference. This program that we're having tonight is the consequence of a student who is at a university who somehow saw the need to have another kind of conversation. Your presence here tonight is based upon that person taking initiative. Not what he was permitted to do, not what was in his job description. It was based upon an inner desire to make the world a better place. Not just from 11 to 11:30 or 11 to 1 o'clock on Sundays or on Fridays or on Saturday or whichever your day is to go and be concerned about your brother and your sister. But it was someone who saw that each day required us to somehow rethink our reality. Initiative on a personal level. We must go from conversation to activism. I came out of the 60s. I'm a child of an era when we saw a world that we didn't like. And we got sick and tired of talking about it. And we got out in the streets and tried to change it. We took on a nation. We took on governments. We took on college presidents. We took on boards of trustees. We took on councils. We took on city councils. We took on an entire nation. And because we did that, young folks who saw a world that they wanted to change, this world is entirely different. The fact that many of us sit where we sit, in educational centers, in certain jobs, in corporate structures, even faces on the television set, it's because someone says, where is the black face on this TV? Where is the Chicano face on TV? Why are there so few black students in this institution? How can you teach an entire university degree and no one ever mentions slavery as a part of America's sick history? How is it that you can talk about where Texas came from and never talk about how Mexico was a part of what Texas is all about? How can you talk about these realities? How can you have a degree in history and leave out the whole story? Whose story is your history? And because of that, programs were changed, curricula were changed, professors were changed, new degrees were given, new access to opportunities were provided because we went from conversation to activism. We must understand that we have a responsibility to require leadership to lead. Stop worrying about your election next time. Stop worrying about whether your contract will be renewed. Stop worrying about whether you'll be tenured. Be of the tradition of the Martin Luther Kings. Be of the tradition of people who said, regardless of the consequences, I'm in a position to lead. Therefore, I must lead. And I must lead regardless of the consequences, even if it takes my life. I'm going to be of the tradition of the people I say that I'm following. So if you are following the tradition of Moses, the tradition of Jesus, the tradition of Muhammad, the tradition of Marx, the tradition of Martin, the tradition of whatever your particular ideological interests may be, you must understand that all of those leaders who you emulate were people who did not talk about change. They took on the status quo and stood up to the status quo, challenged the status quo, and transformed that status to another quo, and therefore transformed the world. We must have more opportunities such as this. This is a town, I understand, with about 4 major institutions of higher learning. This should not be a singular dialogue. In addition to the course requirements, dialogues in human interactions, dialogues in community interaction, dialogues in social interaction need to take place on a regular basis. Not just Friday night waiting for the dance, waiting so you can hip your hop and hop your hip. Not only the opportunity to be able to go and get a little party going on, but it must be an opportunity to engage yourself intellectually, to begin to raise some fundamental questions. One of the frightening things about being a nearly retired professor is that I went to school when students raised critical questions. Now they want to know, will it be on the exam? Any issue that is not going to be on the exam, they don't want to hear about. They want to know, why are you wasting my time? If I begin to talk about a reality that they have a responsibility to transform, and I begin to put comments on the board, they say, will that be on the exam? And I say, hell no. It's going to be in your life, and you won't have a life if you don't begin to raise some fundamental questions about this reality. That's the kind of challenge that's there. So, the spiritual crisis is something that each of us must take responsibility for. We can easily blame the administration of America. We can easily blame the Republicans, the Democrats. We can easily blame the government. We can easily blame the university. We can easily blame the curriculum. But ultimately, the way that the world has been transformed is when the human being in you understood that the divine was using you to recreate the world in its original form based upon its manifestation through your responsibility to challenge things in being as they aren't and to somehow make the crisis become a transformation and an incentive for change. Thank you.
And the church said, all right. All right, moving right along, we're gonna go right into it. Next up is Guadalupe Loro, MSW, which is Masters in Social Work for some of us. She was formerly the superintendent of director of conflict resolution over at the Children's Hospital of Michigan. And so we're just gonna go ahead and get started. Guadalupe Loro.
That's okay. He keeps wanting to make me a superintendent. That's okay. I always tell people, you are not defined by your title, the size of your office, how big your paycheck is. That's not who you are. Who you are, you'll be judged by the things that you do, what you say, and how you say it too. It is such a pleasure for me to be invited back. When Romel called, and he is such a genuine human being. Sometimes people will say to me, I'm just one person, Miss Lara. What can I do? I know that what I heard or what I saw was wrong, but I'm just one person. What difference could I make? The world is changed one person at a time. And so Romel didn't say, 10 people have tried to do this before and nothing happened. No. It doesn't matter. 20 people could be doing this. That's great. We need 20 more people to engage in a dialogue, because if one person leaves here inspired to go out and make a difference right where they're at with their family or in their community, or to tackle that employee that everybody knows is full of pain, and that the way they experience their pain is to bite off everybody's head, and everybody walks around acting like they don't see or hear that human being. If you go back and say, what's going on? When I came to work here, you didn't act like that. What can I do to help you? At least to acknowledge that person, I see you, I hear you. If one person leaves today and does that, this all will have been worthwhile. So one person at a time, you change the world. What Dr. Akbar said, and he was magnificent in delivering that message, is the power of one, but also the power of when many ones come together to collaborate on a common mission. What I'm going to talk about is why so many people talk about collaborating, even in our university settings, but why it's so difficult, because we encounter people who may say they have that same common mission, but what they want to do to get to the common mission is not in line with what we believe we need to do. And so conflict rises up, and then people want to step back. Oh, I wanted to address this issue, but I don't want conflict. I don't deal with conflict well. I often ask my students, how many of you do not have conflict? And there's always one or two. I don't. Ooh, I'm really scared. You might be dead already and not know it, because only dead people do not experience conflict. And so we have this sense about us that we want to be change agents, but that somehow it should not be uncomfortable. It starts with self. You have to find out, what is it that is good in you? What is it that you are lacking? What is it that you need to build on? And if you're hurting, what is it that is not happening that you need to have happen to feel good about yourself? Often my social work students, I'm a social worker by training, as Romel said, will say, oh, I'm in social work because I want to help people. I love deeply. But when you go and see what they're doing initially, they have good outcomes with people that are all a reflection of them. They, oh yes, ma'am. Oh yes, Miss Laura. Thank you, Miss Laura. But the person that comes in angry, they still need service. And they go, I don't want to talk to you. You don't know anything about me. Oh, you will not talk like that. This is a children and family place. And if you're going to talk and act like that, I'll call security. Well, isn't that lovely? You must be that high-level person, not just with the people that mirror you. You must be that high-level person that sees the goodness in others, or the reflection of yourself in others, with those very people that do not reflect you. How will we be a strength provider, or a person that starts where the other person is at? Which means you have to be willing to listen and hear the person that doesn't reflect you. How will you do that if you can only practice with people that are a direct mirror of you? So conflict in our lives, in a diverse environment, is a normal part of what we do. Conflict is not the problem. It is a symptom of a group that currently does not have the skills to move forward. So instead of giving up on each other, you have to go back. You have to learn to embrace those uncomfortable issues, because that's where your humanity, your individual humanity, is enhanced. And in an organization, how you grow an organization is how well you address these uncomfortable conflicts in the workplace. And so I didn't study to go in this area. My area was gerontology, but the first job that I got, I met a woman, Marianne Mahaffey, who recently passed away, a social worker, but she was a politician, a social activist. She was the president of the Detroit City Council for many years, elected over and over because of the works that she did, how she met with people, heard of all kinds of voices, and came together to make the best policy decisions for the people of that city based on the input that you get from the residents. You don't always give everybody what they want, but you make the best decisions for the city when you hear the diverse voices that make up Spokane in this particular instance. And She and the chief of police for sex crimes unit had a vision of creating a program to service women who had been victims of assault. I never planned to be in that work. I wasn't even comfortable with dealing with that subject, but I was open to the job. I came back from Texas after grad school, and it was a lot of fighting, even though these two visionaries wanted these two groups who had the same common mission to improve services to this population and for the police to increase prosecution. They were fighting about the process, how they were going to do it, but they didn't give up. We came together, and both groups achieved their outcome. And we learned to work with the conflict, that the conflict was not the problem, but how we defined the process, how we would communicate with each other, what each one expected of each other as it related to that common mission. That requires dialogue. And when people would get upset and their tone of voice would rise up, people didn't say, "You will not talk like that, you lower your tone," but they would say, "What happened? Did I say something, that offended you?" And if you have somebody who feels that everybody must start where they're at and not be willing to ask a question, that it's possible that your intentions were good, but that somebody else's context, that means something different. That somebody there would do it. If you didn't do it, somebody would address that particular issue. And so together, it wasn't easy, but we were able to do this, be a model for all the rest of the country, and then police departments throughout the country established that similar model. So two people who everybody else there in Detroit thought, "You're crazy, that's never going to happen," but they moved forward. So look at the changes that came from that. And so then I went to Children's Hospital. I was invited to go there to start a similar program in the emergency room. Now I went there from the police department thinking, "Oh good, this is going to be really a break. These people love kids, they believe in goodness and helping and loving and all that." And see, very much like my students, I want to help somebody, I want to love somebody, but is it about you, or are you really starting where that other person is at? And a behavior that I witnessed right away, because if you're going to do this work, you've got to start right there in your office with your coworker before you take it out on the road, right there with your brother, with your sister, with your mother, with your father, with your neighbor. You don't just do this out there, that's who you are. You walk the talk. And I noticed quickly this behavior that at 3 o'clock when shift change came, the staff would go to the list to see who is the person in charge, the attending. And here's their behavior. "Oh God, it's going to be a long night tonight. Dr. Smith is on." Okay? And they'd all act like they knew what it was all about. And they're just going to go along with it. If we came in and I quickly saw this, Dr. Lee was on. "Oh, thank God, it's going to be a good night tonight." You see, the people with the problems have the answers right there. But what are you going to do? In our particular unit, when this person was on that caused havoc, people would be angry, they'd be talking to each other about the other person, and how was that going to change our reality? Depending on where the person was at, some people would say, "I'm going to report this person to the NAACP." Someone else might say, "I'm going to call the Fair Labor Practice Bureau." But what were we doing right there, right in front of us? Somebody had to do something. And on a particular night, we had a terrible outcome where it was embarrassing for visitors who were in our waiting room. What a terrible impression they must have thought of who we were. Because when people act out at work, you're a representation of the whole organization. Just like a member of a family that goes unchecked, people will say, "Oh my goodness, look what they allow there." They may not know the context. Well, so I decided I'm going to go and talk to the person in charge of that particular area. And he told me, "Oh, don't pay attention. That person's been crazy since the day they came here. And they're probably going to retire crazy like that. Just ignore them." As if it didn't have an impact on everybody else. The uncomfortable business is that you don't know how it's going to affect you. But either you stand up for change, because diversity, respecting diversity is about standing up for change, what Dr. Akbar talked about. And each situation is different, but you know, and other people will open the doors for you. Not one person makes these changes. You initiate, but then others like open the doors. So I went to the president's secretary and asked for a meeting, and to his credit, he allowed the meeting to go on. And I didn't go in there and talk bad about this person and attack them as a human being. I talked about their good things, but also about the behavior, what occurred. And I don't believe in using adjectives either, because adjectives mean different things to other people. But I said, I'm very concerned about this employee. I know that they are highly skilled, but on this particular night, and I have witnessed other nights, but I'm only going to tell you about this night because I have documented what occurred. And I'm concerned about the image to the people in our community, what that may represent to them, who we are as a culture, as an organization. And he was able to listen to that. I don't know that he would have listened if I've gone in there crying and saying, why do we tolerate this discrimination, this, all true, but what is the actual thing that occurred so that we could talk humanly about an improvement plan that will help this sister who's in a lot of pain. Because when people are hurting, they don't all just cry. Some people yell, some people get loud, and those are just symptoms of a person that is experiencing great human pain. So how do we address those issues? And so standing up for a dialogue like this is one example, but I'm sure that many of you, especially the students, can think of many things, acts that you may have witnessed in your own class. I was sharing with my friends here earlier that when I was in a graduate program, you know that there are certain professors that teach a class and you have to take that class to have PhD stamped on your head. And this particular class, there were 3 of us, and we had to do an assignment on the family, read a lot of books. We came the day of the assignment, and when the professor asked this woman who was in the class with me and this other man what she interpreted, and she gave her answer, the professor, in a terribly angry manner, yelled at her and told her, well, I can tell your daughter is going to be a real crazy person. And I could see the pain in the woman's face, like she wanted to cry. She didn't say anything. And I felt the pain as if she had attacked me. And the other man didn't say anything. And I wanted to say something, but I thought maybe she will be offended that I say it now. So I waited till the class was over and I said, what are you going to do? Why didn't you say something? I'll support you. And she said, if I don't take her class, everything I've done, quit my job, left my family in South Carolina, is down the tube. And I said, but is this what it means to have social worker stamp PhD on your head? I said, I will respect your decision, but I cannot drive 4 hours round trip to a class if this is what it means. I will not be in this class if this is what this class is about. So I went to meet with my chair of my program, and I said, I take full responsibility. I am taking myself out of this doctoral program. Why? You're doing great. Why? And so I told him in very concrete behavior, the behavior, what was stated, how it was said. And I said, and that in no way is in line with the code of conduct, the code of ethics for what a social worker is. And if that's what it takes to get that degree here, then I'm not going to do it. He said, don't drop out yet. Let me talk to the dean. And she's the only one that taught the class. He calls me back a week later and he says, the dean will teach the class. So the woman and I took the class. Now, there could have been another side to it. Could have been out of the program. But you know what? That's what it is to know which battles to pick and which not to pick. That was an important one for me about, are you who you say you are, or only when it's convenient? Do you take this job only because it pays a lot, even though you know that the values of the organization are not in line with you? You will pay a price in the long run. So you learn to stand up for diversity. You stand up for change. But how do you do it? With a bat in your hand? You're the only one that knows everything? Or do you do it like Dr. Akbar said? Find within yourself your voice. And do you do it out of love? Do you sacrifice yourself for what your values are, for the greater good? Or do you only sacrifice yourself for your personal gain and growth? And it is very difficult in our personal lives as well as at work, in the community. And so the work that I wound up doing, that I just retired from Children's Hospital, because as I shared with the students earlier, my mom was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and I want to spend more of my time with her and taking care of her with my brother and sister in Texas. And the work that I have done there, I started out as a social worker in the ER in the afternoon. I started the rape program for children assaulted by strangers, but then went on to be director of child abuse and social work. I didn't want that job either because I was in the doctoral program. But people in the community said, you've been in Lansing arguing and testifying for policy changes, and you have a position, an opportunity to change oppressive policies in this hospital, and you're going to say no. Why? And so other people help to give you insight. Billy Avery, the founder of the Women's Black Health Movement, always talks about that if you feel conflicted, you need to tell the story to yourself over and over to get insight into why you do what you do. You learn a lot of things about your disciplines here, cognitive professional knowledge, but don't forget that in order to operationalize that cognitive professional knowledge, you must also be building cognitive self-knowledge. Why do you do what you do? Will you always walk around allowing anybody to pull your strings and make you jump? Or will you be the master of the decisions of what you will do for yourself? Thinking objectively about why you're making this decision. And they are painful decisions that we have to make. So you need cognitive professional knowledge, but you also must be building cognitive self-knowledge about yourself. My grandmother always said when I'd come in wild from school, you need to go talk to this teacher, put her in her place. And she would say, listen, Lupe, when you meet a person that makes you good and mad or scares you, and she'd genuflect, get on your knees and thank God. And I would say, ooh, that is so stupid and dumb. In my head, mind you, because if I would have told her, I may not be standing here. And I would think, ooh, that's so stupid. Because, when you're young, you think you know everything. A sure sign of a fool, okay? But when the older you get, the more you worry about how little you know. A friend of mine from the Ojibwe tribe would say, now you're getting close to wisdom when you worry about how little you know. But when you think you know everything, that's a sure sign of a fool. And so my grandmother, what she was saying was really wise, because it's those people that take you out of your comfort zone that you have the most to learn about yourself. If you're feeling really good and everything and you love the world, and all of a sudden, and you say, and I'm this person and I belong to this religion and I do the basket drive and I'm just so in love with myself, okay? And you're just loving everybody, and then somebody comes and just says any old thing, and out of your mouth comes Damien, I call it. These ugly words come out of your mouth. And you go, but that's not who I am, because I'm a spiritual person. Excuse me, when you squeeze an orange, you don't get grape juice. If you squeeze an orange and that's what comes out of you, that's what's living right under the surface. So we must learn to take care of ourselves. What is it that you need to feel good about yourself before you go charging off to rescue everybody else? So for me, the spiritual crisis is that sometimes we get so lost in all the things that are going on that we forget to first start here. Take care of what you need first, and then move forward. It's better to be 6 60 with what you have than 60 still wishing about what you coulda, woulda, shoulda had, you know? So this is not easy work. When people tell me, when will we be done with conflict and diversity? They don't like my answer. When you die. When you die, you'll be really done, okay? And so this is a process. We must learn to celebrate the tremendous successes that we have already achieved, but we must use them like a cushion to help support us as we embrace scarier things that we must confront, but not out of anger and hatred, but out of love. And knowing that if we see that people are hurting when they're acting like that, you know, I always say to people, how has that worked for you, carrying that bat around, whacking people? Has it really worked for you? Because I haven't seen it work that good yet, you know? So it starts with us. You will be evaluated by what you say and what you do. And so I leave you with, always think about context, that people do behaviors, but they are in their social cultural context. Your assessment of what happened is only as good as the questions you ask, the ability to converse, to dialogue. Be very scared if you're having diagnosing people in your head all by yourself. You should be real worried, okay? Because you need to have the conversation with the other people. Thank you for inviting me here, and God bless you for the good work you're doing here.
All right, we're going to take a small break here, give time for the cameras to change their tapes and get ready for the next round. We're going to go ahead and start off fresh, clean, so give us about 5 and we'll start back up. If you have questions and answers, we're going to be going right into this after our last speaker here. So be sure to get a pen and a pad. If you have any questions, pass them off to Raymond Reyes, who is sitting right here. And we will be sure to get those questions out there, given the time limitations. So, all right, last up, we're going to call in the last speaker here. His name is Rabbi Michael Lerner. He just released a book called The Left Hand of God, which was released last February. It was on the national bestsellers list. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. We're going to let him handle the gist of what that book's about and many other things. Rabbi Michael Lerner.
Well, we've had 2 amazing speakers here, and a great deal to learn from the 2 of you, and I'm really, really proud to be on the same platform with you. And have to say that if this were what was going on in universities, I'd want to go back to university. But it isn't, right? What? Yeah, right. It isn't. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the spiritual crisis in America from a different perspective, but nevertheless affirming everything that 2 of you have said and building on it, really sort of almost like a footnote. But I want to try to tell you something about the work that I did as a psychotherapist and studying the psychodynamics of American society, and particularly trying to understand why people have been moving politically to the right in the past 20 years in this country. And the issue that we were studying was trying to figure out, not for people who are born into right-wing families, not for people who are born into wealth, and not for people who are born into families where they were brought up in a fundamentalist religion. But rather, we're trying to understand about people who were previously Democratic Party voters, people who were coming from middle-class families who could see in a fairly clear way that the policies being pursued by the Republican Party and the right was not serving their interess. That is to say, like if you're cutting taxes, and it turns out the bulk of the taxes being cut are being cut from the 3 to 5% of the richest people in the country, and the rest of for you, what happens is that your social services at the local level are getting cut off. And so there's a higher level of crime, or there's a higher level of, there aren't many of the services that you had previously available to you. And you end up saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna go with that guy, right? The one who's essentially screwing my economic interests. There's something bizarre going on. Okay, so when you say, well, it's important to know what the questions are, one of the questions that we started asking was, why do people vote for or support people who, in public office, pursue policies that are against the interests of the very people who voted for them, against the economic interests of the very people who voted for them? So that's the question we started with, trying to understand there's something bizarre going on in the country when people are doing that. I mean, it's not bizarre for wealthy people to vote for policies that benefit wealthy people, right? But there's something slightly on the bizarre side when middle-income people are voting for policies that benefit wealthy people. Now, yeah, I know there's this fantasy that everyone is going to end up there, right? A lot of people in American society buy this fantasy that, well, it may be at some later point in my life. But I mean, all the evidence shows that that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. For the vast majority of Americans are not going to be ending up being the Soroses or the fundamentally rich people in the society, and they're voting against their economic interests. So we're asking, how did this happen? What's going on? And so we started a study that originally was funded by the National Institute for Mental Health, and over the course of the last 30 years, we've spoken to over 10,000 middle-income working people trying to understand what's going on. And basically what we learned was this, that there's a spiritual crisis in American society, and that spiritual crisis is not being addressed by the liberal and progressive forces, and it is being addressed by the right. And now I want to tell you about that spiritual crisis and help you understand what that's about. Now, it encompasses everything that you said. I mean, totally. So in a way, I felt like, I won't speak tonight. You've already said enough. But since I came all the way here, all right. So, so we asked people to tell us about their lives. The people I'm talking about are these people who are moving to the right politically, but who weren't always there. We asked them to tell us about their lives, and they start by telling us about work, the world of work. Now, why the world of work? Well, it turns out that most people spend most of their waking hours in the world of work and in travel to and from. So, and that's most of their waking hours. And you'll find this out if you when you get out of college. Most of your waking hours is going to be spent in the world of work. And the way that people learn to think in the world of work has a massive impact on the few hours that they're awake outside of the world of work. And how are people learning to think? Well, here's what they told us, these 10,000 or more people that we were interviewing. First thing I learned in the world of work is that there's a bottom line. And the bottom line is this: I have to maximize money or power for the people who run this institution, or I have to show that I can contribute either directly or indirectly to money and power for them, or I'm out of there. They're not my ability to maintain a job is dependent on me being able to convince them that my work is going to contribute to their bottom line financially or power-wise. And if I don't do that, I'm out. Or my work unit has to be able to do that. Or if my work unit can't do it, at least the whole corporation that I'm part of, the whole business, or they'll just move the thing to some other place. They'll move it to Southeast Asia, where they can do a better job of maximizing the bottom line. So I learned, number one, they told me, I learned that there's a bottom line, and the bottom line is to maximize money and power. And that my task is to show that either directly or indirectly, I can contribute to their bottom line. And number two, I learned that there's nobody in that workplace who's going to work to take care of me and make me look good unless there's some deal that I can work out to make them look good. But basically, everybody is there to look out for number one. And they have to look out for number one. It's not because there's something bad about the people. There's nothing bad about the people. It's that they learn that if they don't look out for number one, nobody else is going to look out for that number one, and they're going to be out of there. They're going to lose their job. They're certainly not going to advance themselves. They're not going to make a good living. So what I learned, number two, they told us, is looking out for number one is the common sense of the world of work. I have to see other people primarily through the framework of, what can you do for me? Can you help me out? Can you assist me in some way? That is to look at other people more and more and more through the framework of what we call in more academic circles, we call this a utilitarian framework, or we call it an instrumental framework. You're an instrument of mine. You're an extension of my needs. But basically, it's about looking out for number one and seeing other people from the standpoint of what can you get from them. Now, when these people come home from a workplace like that, they tell us something that we were very surprised to hear, which is, yeah, I'm doing that all day, and I hate it. I hate it. I really don't like having to be in this kind of a workplace. And we ask people, tell us more. Well, what do you mean you hate it? I mean, you're making a living, right? What do you mean you hate it? And we heard something over and over and over again that at first we couldn't believe, and then we realized there was something wrong with us that we couldn't believe it. And that is this, that most people in the world of work reported to us, and this is a very wide sample. This is one of the biggest studies ever done of the psychodynamics of American society. Anyway, the people said to us, we want to have some meaning in our work. We want to have some higher meaning or purpose to what we're doing. We don't want to spend all day just maximizing money for somebody. We don't want a life that's only about getting by and accumulating money. We want some higher meaning. There's a guy named, a reverend named Rick Warren. He wrote a best-selling book in the past few years. It's called The Purpose-Driven Life. Sold 23 million copies, okay? People desperately want some framework of meaning and purpose to their life that goes above, that transcends just the individualism and selfishness of the competitive marketplace. Now, this astounded us, and then, as I say, we then realized, why should it astound us? It astounded us because we had already bought into the fantasy that only intellectuals or liberals or whatever care about meaning. We had bought into the fantasy that the American working class, all they care about is money. And it was wrong. It was deeply, deeply, deeply wrong. Well, we went to the Democratic Party and we went to the unions, and we started to tell them this. And they said, nah, you're wrong. It's not like that. We said, what do you mean it's not like that? We're talking to the people, on the grassroots level, and they're saying, no, our people, they don't care about that. They only care, they only come to union meetings when there's a contract negotiation once every 2 or 3 years, and they don't come any other time. So all they care about is money. So we went back to the people in our groups, and we'd say that, and they'd say, yeah, because the union meetings are boring, number one, and number two, because yeah, we're going to show up at contract negotiations, because we never said we didn't care about money at all. We do care about money, because if I'm going to waste my life in a world of work in which there's no meaning and purpose, then the very least I can get is some decent compensation for wasting my life. And not only that, but that I could take this money and maybe by the time I retire at age 65 or 68 or whatever it'll be by the time I'm that age, maybe it'll be 75 already by that point, whatever it is, then finally I'll have a few years in which I can shape something in my life that I really believe in, as opposed to just the wasting of my life up to that point. And they also said, and by the way, how do you explain that we go to church on Sundays? There's no money to be made there. In fact, we had giveaway money. So how do you explain that? These people say that we don't care about anything but money. It's not true. We care about meaning and purpose to our lives. So then we said, okay, well, how about changing the workplace? And they said, no way, nothing can be changed. That's just the real world. The real world is that way. And coming back from the real world that way, seeing it as fixed in that way, people then internalize the logic of the world of work with its vision of what really counts, of what it is to be rational in this society. And what they've learned is that what it is to be rational is to be a rational maximizer of self-interest. A rational maximizer of self-interest. Maximizer is like, you maximize it, you make as much of it as you can. Okay, self-interest, that's what it is to be rational. It's to maximize your own self-interest. It's to take care of number one. It's to look out for number one. And then this has devastating consequences for the society as a whole. Why? Because when you're doing this, you find that you're surrounded by all these other people who are looking at the world from the same standpoint. They're looking out for number one. And as a result, people feel very lonely and scared. Partly it reflects in friendships, where more and more friendships are based on a kind of exchange relationship. I give to you on the reasonable expectation you'll give back an equal amount of time and energy to me. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that as people get older or if people get sick, they find that they can't give back an equal amount of time or energy, and then the people who used to be there for them aren't there for them anymore. Not a good exchange of relation. They can't get a good exchange on their time and energy, and so they're not there for them as much. So people who are older report feeling very lonely, very scared of getting old in this society, because nobody is going to be there to take care of you because you can't give back an equal amount. It has a dramatic effect on dating, because more and more people in the world of dating report that by the time they're 25, 30, they've been through a score of relationships in which, whether that's one night or whether that's a month or whether that's a year and a half with this person or that person, in which they have either been used or used. They've been with a lot of different people, and those relationships have been primarily about what the other person can get to satisfy their needs. I don't just mean sex also, but it's experiences. Interesting, let's try this, let's try that, let's try the other thing. Now you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Hey, we're young and adventurous and so forth. But by the time people get to be 25, 30 years old, they already have a deeply skeptical vision about what other human beings are like, because they've encountered so many people who are seeing them in an instrumental or utilitarian way, namely seeing them only through the framework of, is this going to be a good ride? Is this going to be a good trip? How is it going to play out for me? What's it going to do for me? So then you finally get people deciding at a certain point in their dating life, when they've had enough of this, okay, I'm going to make a commitment to somebody, I'll get married. But increasingly, because people live in this society, and with these values that were beautifully articulated by the two previous speakers, you find that more and more people are entering into relationships, consciously or unconsciously, with the following kind of thought. I'm ready to make a commitment now, so I'm going to commit to you. And what I mean by this, by being ready to make a commitment, is this. Amongst the people who are likely to fall for me in the short run, you will satisfy more of my needs than anyone else. Okay? And so it seems like a good deal, okay? You're going to satisfy more of my needs than anyone else who's likely to fall for me. So I'm with you. Here's my commitment, okay? I'm committed to you because you'll satisfy more of my needs than anyone else. Now, what's the problem, you might say? Well, the problem is that your partner, if your partner is normally rational, chances are that she or he has also made the same calculation, okay? Amongst the people who are likely to fall for her or him, you're the one who's going to satisfy more of their needs than anybody else who's likely to fall for her or him. Okay, so now again, you say, what's the problem? The problem is that people feel very lonely in this circumstance because they do not know if they can count on their partner really being there. Marriage doesn't have the same meaning anymore because of this change in the fundamental structure of consciousness of the society, a society in which everyone is learning to look out for number one. So, and I'm not talking only about the 50% of all marriages I'm sure you know this someplace in your consciousness. 50% of all marriages in the United States end in divorce.
Yes.
Okay, but I'm not talking about only the 50% that end in divorce. The insecurity goes also to the 50% that don't end in divorce because you don't know which of those two categories you're in. Okay? And so you don't know for sure that at some point your partner is not going to find somebody whom they imagine, whether real or not, they imagine would satisfy yet more of their needs.
Right.
And if they find somebody who they imagine would satisfy yet more of their needs, well, then as a rational maximizer of self-interest, they're surely going to want to cut a better deal.
That's right.
Now, do you understand what I'm talking about here? You see, now this cutting a better deal thing, I'm not putting anybody down for this, okay? I want to tell you, I myself have been divorced, and I'm not trying to put anybody down. I'm saying to you that this is a dynamic in the society that causes tremendous insecurity, tremendous pain and fear. Now, it doesn't cause the same fear and pain to everyone. It's differential, and it's differentiated by the following: how much you think you are marketable in the marketplace of relationships. Because the younger you are, the more conventionally attractive you are, or the more financially secure you are, the less this is terrifying. You say, okay, I've been in this relationship 5 years, 10 years, it's terrible that it's broken up, but I'll go on. Okay? But now on the other hand, the older you are, the less conventionally attractive you are, and the less financially secure you are, the more this is terrifying. It's terrifying because you know that what's out there is a society filled with people who are all looking out for number one, and you're not so sure that you're so marketable in that society. Okay, and you could be alone for the rest of your life in a society which is very, very coupled on the one hand, and also very filled with people who don't know much about caring for anybody else except themselves. So it gets to be very, 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 very scary when you're in that part of the population. So, and this is so when we hear about people talking about the family crisis in American society, this wasn't made up by the right, political right. This is real. It's real. And as I say, my point here is that this is not, I'm not blaming anybody. I want to tell you that it's almost impossible to grow up in this society and not think this way about other people. It's almost impossible to spend all day long in a world of work and then turn on television in which every sitcom is really about who's going to get power over whom in every little interaction, in every little, whether it's gay people with each other or straight people with each other or black people with each other or white people with each other. What's funny in the situation, supposedly, and they pump in the humor, the laughter to make sure that you get it, what you're supposed to be laughing at, what's funny is who gets the upper hand in every little interaction. It's all about power over and domination over. It's almost impossible to grow up in this society without thinking in these terms, in these instrumental terms, in these terms of who's going to have the greater power, who's going to dominate who, and what's in it for me? How much of my needs going to be taken care of here? Now, I say it's almost impossible because there is another way of thinking, and it's what we mean when we talk about a spiritual consciousness. A spiritual consciousness looks at other human beings and doesn't say, I wonder how you'll look on my arm when I take you to my boss. You know, I wonder how you'll be at are you a good earner? Are you going to make a lot of money for me? You know, are you going to take care of me in that way? I wonder if, I wonder if you're going to help me in this way or that way in my life. But instead, a spiritual consciousness looks at other human beings and says, I see you as valuable just because you are an embodiment of the Spirit of God. You are created in the image of God. Or if you don't like the God language, then say, I see you as valuable because you are fundamentally valuable, because you are an embodiment of the sacred energy of the universe. If you don't like the word sacred, we'll say Martin Buber talked about I-thou relationship rather than an I-it relationship. That sounds too mystical to you? Immanuel Kant, he spoke about seeing another as a subject and not as an object. However you language it, it's a very different consciousness. And similarly, when looking at nature, a spiritual consciousness doesn't say, I wonder if there's something here I could sell. Maybe I could turn that forest into wood that was needed in Japan or wherever, got a good market for it or whatever, but instead responds to the universe with awe and wonder. Okay, now this consciousness, this spiritual consciousness, this spiritual way of being seen is decreasingly the case. Very, very few people have that experience. Or let's put it this way. What we learned in our study is that more and more people report that it's very rare that they're seen in that way, not just by their friends or people that they, casually know, but even by their wife or their husband, by their kids. Hey, mommy, hey, daddy, what have you done for me lately? In other words, there is very little opportunity for people to feel that they are being seen, that they are being recognized as an embodiment of the sacred, as somebody fundamentally valuable, as created in the image of God, as somebody who deserves to be cared for just for who she or he is, and not for what he or she will produce, not for what tests she can pass, not for what hoops she can jump through, not for how much money he or she is going to make, not for how beautiful she is or he is by conventional standards, okay? But simply see them in their core being as a human being who is an embodiment of the sacred energy of the universe and deserves to be cared for. And so few people have that opportunity today. So few people are getting that. And so the spiritual crisis in American society is this, that increasing numbers of people feel that they are never really seen, that they are only seen through instrumental categories, through utilitarian categories, through what can you do for me categories, and never really seen. And when you have people who are spending all day in a world of work in which they feel that they have no opportunity to connect to higher meaning and purpose with their work, and then they come home into a home life, into a personal life in which it's very rare for them to feel that they are fully seen and recognized, when these two factors come together, you have a spiritual crisis in the society.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Now, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a spiritual crisis. And folks, there is a real spiritual crisis. And the real spiritual crisis in this society was not created by the right as a PR gimmick. It's real. There really is a spiritual crisis based on the ethos of materialism and selfishness in this society. And the right got tremendous political credibility because it named the crisis, because it said there is a spiritual crisis here based on materialism and selfishness, and the hard thing for liberals to get is the right was correct.
Yes.
The right was correct. There really is that spiritual crisis. Now, the terrible part of the story is that the right then goes on to blame it on whoever is the demeaned others of the society. And this happens all around the world in the same way. Whenever you find a right-wing religious movement or a right-wing political movement, they will pick whoever is the demeaned other of the society, and they'll say, there isn't enough love and caring, there's too much materialism and selfishness, and you know why? It's because of them. And who is that now? The them differs depending on where you are. For much of the 20th century, it was the Jews. Why the Jews? Because the Jews were the ones who had been blamed for 1900 years before that for killing Jesus, right? So that was an easy one. You already have a demeaned other there. You have a demeaned other, people are used to it. right? If you go to China, you find that it's the Japanese or sometimes the Koreans. If you go to Japan, you find it's sometimes the Koreans. If you go to Southeast Asia, you find it's the Chinese. Or in India, it's the Chinese who get the blame. Today in Europe, you look at it and you find it's the Muslims who are getting that blame and Turks who are getting that blame. In the United States, of course, it's always been primarily African Americans and Native Americans who have been the primary subject, primary demeaned other. But the right, in its very strong generosity, has been willing to expand the category of demeaned others so that today we're getting not only them, but all immigrants. All immigrants are being blamed, okay? Or you're also getting all women, particularly feminist women. Now, why feminist women? Well, they say they're just interested in themselves, you see. Now, of course, they leave out of the story the fact that for 10,000 years, women were systematically denied equal rights. And so they're living in the period when women finally woke up and started to struggle for their own rights. And because of that, the right says, oh, they're selfish, they're a special interest. You see what I'm saying? Okay. Or then they'll go and say gays and lesbians. Now, why gays and lesbians? Well, the right says, you see, these people don't have children. They're not raising the next generation, which, by the way, isn't true. Go to any city where you don't have a strong degree of homophobia, and you'll find that gay families and lesbian families are trying to adopt or to raise kids. But leave aside the truth of their claim. I want to show you the logic of it. The issue is they say, they're not having kids. See, so they're having sex just for the fun of it, and it's not fair for the rest of us. Because we have consequences with our sex, and these people just have pleasure. Now I say to them, maybe you ought to try the pleasure part, You could get some pleasure out of it too. But in any event, and now in the last few years, they've gone to all liberals or all secular people are being blamed for this. Now, the irony of the situation is that the right is the primary force in this society that is the champion of the ethos of selfishness and materialism in the world of work. Because in the economy, the right consistently says, whenever there's an attempt to introduce social responsibility into the workplace or into the economy, the right says, no, don't do that. So they fight against, for example, the introduction of a fair wage for all workers, a living wage. They fight against health and safety regulations in the workplace. They fight against any regulation about not destroying the environment. They fight against it. And why? They say, look, the best good for all will be served if each corporation is freed from government regulations and restrictions so that it can maximize its profits. And then those profits will magically trickle down to the rest of the society, and everybody else will benefit. Now, I'm not getting into the question of the truth or falsity of their economic theory, but I just want to show you the position they're in. Here they are championing all day long in the world of work and the economy the ethos of selfishness and materialism. They're saying let everybody pursue their own interests and let every corporation pursue its own interest without restriction, and look out for number one. Then, when people who've spent all day doing that come home and bring with them, as they inevitably will, the materialism and selfishness that has been the bottom line of the world of work that they've been internalizing all day, the right positions itself as the champion of the pain and says, isn't it terrible that people are suffering in this way? How do they get away with this? Well, the answer is they get away with this because the progressive forces, the liberal forces, are not even in the relevant ballpark. The liberal and progressive forces do not understand that there is a spiritual crisis. In fact, they don't even know what spirit is. By and large, they think spirit or God is just a code word for the racism, sexism, and homophobia of the right. They think that there is that, and this is not a little problem, it's a deep problem. They came out of the liberal and progressive forces and emerged with the capitalist class in the struggle against feudalism. And the way they did that was by adopting a worldview that says that which is real is that which can be verified through sense datum, that is through our senses, or can be measured. And anything that can't be measured or can't be verified through sense datum is not to be given respect. And what's the way we say not to be given respect in the contemporary world? Nonsense. It's nonsense. Why sense? Because sense in this worldview is the ultimate truth. And I call this the new religion, or the dominant religion of the contemporary world, because this religion, why is it a religion? Because if you take its fundamental statement of belief, namely that that which is real is that which can be verified through sense datum or measured, that statement cannot be verified through sense datum, and it cannot be measured. It's a belief system. It's just a belief system like any other belief system, only it happens to be the dominant one that we live in, and so everybody believes it and thinks that, oh, well, this is not a belief system, this is just truth, this is rationality, and so forth. But the problem is that then what the left fought against the capitalist class about was that they said, okay, we buy the same thing you do, that what really counts is that which can be verified through sense datum and measured, and what's the main thing that can be measured? Money. Money can be measured. So what the left said is, we agree with you about what's real, we just want a fairer distribution of wealth and power in the society. Now let me say here that we don't have a real fair distribution of wealth and power in the society. The left hasn't won on those struggles. But I'm totally with them on those struggles. I think they were absolutely right. And when I heard today, sitting here in a meeting earlier today and listening to the reality of poor people in the city of Spokane and understanding the level of suffering that's going on right here, right now, I said, I wish the left had been winning. I wish the left had been able to eliminate poverty and homelessness and hunger in the city of Spokane. I wish it had. But what I'm trying to tell you is this, that a left that hasn't been winning in part because for a very large section of Americans, the pain in their life is not only the deprivation of material well-being or political rights. There is a very large section of Americans who are in pain about something else, and it is the deprivation of spirit. It is the deprivation of love, of caring, of kindness, of generosity, of meaning and purpose to life. This is the spiritual crisis in their lives, and when they hear the left or people, liberal and progressives, acting as though, hey, you've made it already, you white middle-class people. It's just somebody else who's suffering. They feel deeply misunderstood. They feel that nobody really in the liberal or progressive world understands a thing about their life. Because if you think I've made it, when I'm thinking I'm alone, I don't know if my husband or my wife is really going to be with me. I feel like my kids don't really see me. I'm in a world where my work life is only about money and not about meaning. I don't feel like I have made it in any way, and you guys are telling me it's time for me to stop worrying about myself, and I'm being selfish if I'm worrying about myself. I should be only worried about somebody else, and I'm in deep pain and you don't get it, then you don't get me. Do you see what I'm talking about? Do you? Does anybody here get it? Get it? So this is this is why we need a different kind of liberal and progressive movement in this country. And that's why we've started this organization. It's called the Network of Spiritual Progressives. It's co-chaired by me, by Cornel West, who's the African-American professor of religious studies at Princeton University, and by Benedictine sister Joan Chittister, who is one of the leading voices in the Catholic Church for equality for women. And we are building a national organization, and I'll just tell you very quickly, because I think our time is almost up here, that we're about a fundamental different paradigm about what politics should be, and we call it a new bottom line. We want a new bottom line. That is, today, every institution or social practice gets defined as rational or productive or efficient. Let's say you're talking about a corporation, you're talking about a government policy, you're talking about your school system, you're talking about your healthcare system. It gets defined as rational, productive, or efficient to the extent that it maximizes money and power. And we're saying that's the old bottom line. We need a new bottom line that says institutions, corporations, government policies should be judged efficient, rational, and productive not only to the extent that they maximize money and power, but also to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and ecological sensitivity, enhance our capacities to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to respond to the universe with awe, with wonder, with gratitude, and with radical amazement at the grandeur of creation. That's a different bottom line, folks. Okay? It's not that there aren't a lot of people who are loving or caring, but you ask them their story and they'll tell you that they're that despite the institutions in which they spend their lives, not because of them. That they have to fight to be loving and caring in a life where the bottom line is money and power and manipulation and domination over others. So a politics that spoke in a language of love and caring and kindness and generosity, of awe and wonder at the universe, of a spiritual, recognizing the other as an embodiment of the holy energies of the universe, is a very different kind of politics. It transcends the old left-right distinction. It makes it possible for many people, and we found this in our study, many of the people who are going to the right didn't agree with the right on the war or on environment or on social justice. But they said, hey, you know what? The left, first of all, they make us feel stupid. They make us feel put down. They make us feel particularly stupid if we're into God or religion, because they have this secular attitude that makes it seem like anybody who's into God is really dumber than they are, and maybe they need our vote, but they hope we'll come up to their higher level of rationality at some point, okay? We have gotten, so they make us feel bad. So, you know, for a huge number of people in this country, and this explains why the polls always show before the election that people are agreeing with the Democrats and they're not voting that way, is a huge number of people in this country, the issues are not the issue. The issues are not the issue. The issue is, where do I feel cared for? Where do I feel recognized? Who seems to see me as a decent person and not as a jerk? And that's often where the political energy goes. We need to create a different kind of politics. Politics based on love and caring and kindness and generosity, on awe and wonder at the universe. Now you might say, this guy's a dreamer. This is crazy. You know, I mean, you know, like, come on, be realistic, Rabbi Lerner. This is never going to happen, right? And that's exactly, by the way, what people said to the women's movement 40 years ago. When women came forward and said, we want to see a society in which women have equality. You know what the first response of not just men, but of most women was? Oh, come on. You know, show us a society in the whole history of the human race where women have been equal in the bedroom, in the kitchen, or in the workplace. And you know what? They couldn't show it. They couldn't show it. They had very, very, very few examples. Let's say it that way. There may have been a few, very, very few examples of that. Okay, and they said to those women, you're being so unrealistic, unrealistic. And I say, thank God for those women being unrealistic, because by being unrealistic, they changed the reality that everybody said was unchangeable. But the reason why people feel that it's unrealistic, and let's say feel it's unrealistic to talk about building a society about love and caring, is because they're certain that there's nobody else besides your friends or your people in your church or your people in your women's group or your people in your union or your people in your anti-war organization who want that. And what I'm here to tell you is I've traveled around this country and there are tens of millions of people who want it. Only they don't know about you and you don't know about them. The media keeps us all invisible from each other. That's part of why we started 20 years ago this magazine called Tikkun, which is part of the network of spiritual progressives. I'm hoping that some of you will actually go home and join this organization, and you'll get Tikkun as part of it. You can get it online. You can join online at TIKKUN, Tikkun. It's a Hebrew word. It means to heal, repair, and transform the world. But it's not a Jewish organization. It's an interfaith organization. And not just for people who believe in God, but also for people who don't believe in God, but who do recognize that there's a spiritual dimension to human reality, a spiritual dimension to the universe. And I'd like to invite you to join us. But what people say is, it'll never happen, it can't happen, because it's just us. And I got this when I spoke to a group of 400 Methodists in Kansas, and they all said to me, this is terrific, but nobody, you know, it'll never work. I said, why? They said, because it's obvious. Nobody wants this kind of a world except Methodists in Kansas. So I said, well, why do you think that? They said, because we watch television, we read national newspapers, it's obvious everybody's portrayed as just looking out for number one and selfish, and like it'll never happen because of that, because these people on the coasts are just out for themselves. Now, when I speak about this in Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco or Boston or Washington, what do people say to me? It's a great idea, it's terrific, but middle America? They'll never buy it. Okay, this is the thing that keeps everybody in place, is the certainty that there's nobody else out there who really wants your highest vision. So everybody scales down what they're talking about to the narrowest possible place. And that narrow place doesn't build the bridges for a transformative movement. A transformative movement has to be not just about what they're against. A lot of liberals and a lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives, a lot of lefties, they know what they're against. It's time to start saying what we are for, what our vision of the world that we really want is. And this is that kind of a vision. It's a vision that talks about love, but it's also a vision that talks about awe and wonder. It's a vision that talks about generosity and ecological sanity, but it also talks about recognizing the sacred in each other. I think we can build this together. I hope you'll join Tikkun. I hope you'll join the network of spiritual progressives. You can find it on the Tikkun website, or you can just go to spiritualprogressives.org. We can do this together. Let's do it. Thanks.
Excellent.
Okay, next up, how we're gonna go ahead and structure this is we're gonna go ahead and give the cameraman enough time. Don't leave. What we're gonna do is, if you have questions, go ahead and shift them over to those middle aisles. I'm gonna sweep by and pick them up. That'll give the cameraman time to get the next camera going for our next speech portion of it. We're gonna go ahead and it's kind of a fishbowl thing where we're all gonna kind of dig deep into this whole idea. So give us a little bit of time. Pass up those questions. I'll be sure Raymond gets it, and we'll get started on the next portion. Thanks.